Welcome to the first. You have a story. If you look back on your life, you've done things for the first time that no one in your family, in your town, in the country has done. This is Dr. Sandi. You have unknowingly paved the way for others without knowing it or even acknowledging it. This is where you tell your story so that those who come after you can walk in your footsteps to build their own firsts. How did Ian Tolson become the first in his circle of friends to go from being homeless to owning his own home? Ian told me that developing great habits is what helped him. With the help of numerous therapists during his life, Ian has learned how to move from destructive habits to lifelong and life-sustaining ones. Ian grew up in a small town in Montana where he was put on Ritalin by a psychiatrist who was also the school principal. The principal told his parents that they would kick him out of fourth grade if he did not get on the drug. The drug changed his life and did more harm than good by mentally depleting him. Ian eventually became a drug abuser, became homeless, moved to Colorado, and moved around quite a bit before returning to Montana. Ian developed his habit theory based on his life experiences. Now he's drug-free for many years, owns his own home, and he enjoys reading and doing simple things like playing the harmonica. Let's listen to Ian's journey. Hey everybody, welcome to The First with Dr. Sandi. Today I'm speaking to Ian Tolson. Welcome, Ian.
Hi there.
Thanks for coming.
My
We
pleasure.
met through the podcasters, and so you're my first interview. That's my first interview from the podcast. So let me hear a little bit about yourself, Ian, and just let our audience get to know you.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in a small town called Whitefish, Montana. And if you're not familiar with Montana, it's very far up north. I was on the border of Canada, probably about an hour away. And winters were very cold, anywhere very commonly in the negatives, sometimes ranging into -30, -35 degree weather, and experiencing things like having your car tires freeze to the ground. And it was very uncomfortable. And I lived through it growing up, so I knew nothing else except the cold winters. And the summer times were a winter Florida day is a hot Montana summer day. So everything is very cold up there in comparison to a lot of other places in the States. And I grew up very avidly into being active. I was working out, skateboarding, gymnastics, biking, lifting weights, everything in between. And I was put on a drug early on, not by choice, to quote unquote help with school. And it did a lot more damage than good. And so from fourth grade to seventh grade, I basically had to experience this downward spiral, in a sense, of
I'm sorry, were you taking drugs from first grade?
No, fourth grade.
Oh,
So
from fourth grade.
yeah, fourth grade, I was put on a drug, and this is like my developing years when my mind is like
Yes.
growing and wanting to expand and heal and do well. And so I'm being put on this drug that is making it so that way it's quote unquote helping me focus, but it's really just draining me emotionally, physically,
Was that
mentally.
Ritalin?
Yeah, actually was.
Yeah, I know some people who've been on Ritalin and just took themselves off of it because they felt it was doing more bad than good.
Yes. Yes. And that's exactly where I was. And so I went through probably about 3 years of it. And fortunately, it wasn't addictive. There's some medications out there that it's like kind of, you have to be very careful about getting off of it. Fortunately, I was able to get off it easily. And afterwards, I noticed that I had a bad mental state, and I wasn't happy, and I would commonly forget what people had said. I kind of developed like a memory problem, and it was comparable in some ways to early stages of Alzheimer's. Like, it was really bad for me. Yeah. So it wasn't a fun experience for me at all. And so I became very interested in improving my mental health. And so I had to figure out ways to correct my diet, excuse me, and other ways to compensate.
When you say you had to figure it out, where were your parents in this, helping you to figure out?
I don't think they really knew what was going on. I mean, the whole reason I was put on the drugs in the first place is because I had a psychiatrist for a principal, and the psychiatrist told my mother that if I wasn't going to take the drugs, then I would have to find a different school to go to.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Pretty intense decision making, especially for a parent. And when you have the teachers, principal, other parent, other authority figures like the doctor all saying, hey, we should get this kid on drugs, it makes it very unclear that it's a bad choice. And so I wasn't up for it, and I didn't want to be put on the drugs at all. I was very against the idea of it, but my, let's say, communication skills might not have been adequate as like a 7-year-old talking to these adults, right? And so
that is so scary to hear.
Yeah. It wasn't like a lot by choice or anything, but I will say that long term, I think it was in a way good for me, because I was able to go through this transition of kind of hardship. I wouldn't say it was like I went through the worst thing ever, but it was definitely like difficult in the sense of I was able to make friends and get along with people quite easily beforehand. I could concentrate in school. I could do my homework, everything. I was like functioning. I was totally fine. But afterwards, it was a grinding effort to get along with people. It was getting into arguments afterwards, and my mental ability was very difficult. I was a very imaginative person, and I realized with the last couple of years that I was on the drugs, I quote unquote decided at a certain age that I was like, I'm not going to have an imagination anymore. Like, it's a really weird thing to say, but it was influenced by the drugs and kind of just to stop thinking in a way. But it was kind of like my own choice, but it was not good by any means. And so I spent more or less 10 years getting over this strain of having to compensate, and it was difficult but good for me to go through. And I wouldn't even say it was until 20 years after taking the drugs that I finally found the right supplements to change and heal my I would say whatever it was that was going on mentally.
So Ian, how did you come to realize it was the drug, that you really were not like that this was induced by the drugs?
I went through a lot of therapy, like thousands of dollars, like that, tens of thousands of dollars of therapy, of just wanting to improve myself and realizing there was a problem, and understanding after a while that my thoughts and what the drugs thoughts were actually two different things. If we really want to get into it, there's just a point where I was having very dark thoughts. And after going through the therapy, I could kind of distinguish like, oh, okay, I can tell the difference between the way I think, that's natural, and then the way that the drugs influence thoughts. And it's not easy to figure it out, because when you're taking the drugs and you develop the thoughts as when you're before the age of 10, you can't tell the difference. You're just like, oh, I'm really unhappy. I don't know why. But then over time, you kind of start to figure it out. And then, like I said, after enough therapy, I was able to be like, oh, I get it now. But I mean, that was like 20 years afterwards. It wasn't, I couldn't tell the difference from the first 20 years after I took the drugs.
Did you ever confront's not the best word, Did you ever speak to the principal who got you onto the drugs or asked for you to be on the drugs? Did you ever talk to him?
I wanted to speak with her
Oh, it's okay.
after,
Oh,
yeah, no worries at all. No worries at all. I wanted to speak with her after, I would say, about the time I was going through the therapy and realizing what was going on. I wanted to reach out to her and tell her that she did a lot of damage than good, and that
and
it
probably
really,
to more kids as well, right? Not
yeah,
just
yeah.
you.
Right, that's true. But I think the overall problem is, and I've done some interviews with doctors on this, and big pharmacy companies are actually the problem. It's not just a single incident where I'm being isolated. I mean, I was being
Yes.
isolated, I was being picked out, but the big problem is pharmaceutical companies being allowed to say, "Hey, we got to put
They're
your."
pushers.
Yeah, they're very pushy. Yes, I mean they're putting psychiatrists in schools. It's not beneficial for anybody. I mean, they're being seen as helpful, but it's actually harmful in a lot of
Now,
ways. Excuse me.
was this a test? Did they use this? Like, was research being done on you at that point? Or
No, not at all. There was no brain scans. There was no. All they did is sat me in a room with my family doctor, and they were like, "Yep, he has ADD." I'm like what? There was no scans of my brains. There was no testing done. He basically just looked at me and decided. I was sitting in a.
you look like you have ADD.
Yeah, you look like you have it. And from what I understand, when psychiatrists get together, or the people who make the decisions on these things for the different diseases, they basically just decide. There's no actual evidence or fact checking or anything. They just have a book of diseases. And I've heard diseases as silly as like math. There's like a math disease, and there's a whole array of them. Like if I'm not mistaken, being like not being straight was a disease at some point, and then they like
Yes.
removed it when it wasn't to their use anymore, or something like that. Like it's very strange. It's very odd. It's none of it makes sense. It's very illogical in many ways.
So it's interesting that you've had a lot of therapy. What made you start trusting, since a psychiatrist got you into this in the first place? What made you start trusting other therapists or psychiatrists for that?
I don't trust any psychiatrist. Just to clarify this, I didn't seek I should say that I speak spiritual counseling is probably the best way to
Okay.
put that. I found a different group of people that were helping me out, and I could see that they were helping others, and I could see that what they were doing was good, and I could choose from there to say, okay, I would like to go and be with what this group is doing, because I know it's like basically I chose like certain religions to get a part of, is another way to put it.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
you said in your write-up that you were homeless. So tell me that journey from, where you were in school, uh, going to therapists, becoming homeless, and then you also said you became a homeowner. So
Yeah.
that's a great
Yeah. So there's a lot of it's a lot of twisting and turning. I grew up in, I would say, a pretty fortunate household, and I had a lot of choices. The drugs weren't one of them, but I was put on the drugs, and so I went through this process of basically getting by in school, just skating through it, just like the average student. And I just didn't really want to be there. And so I graduate high school, I get into a semester of college, I just drop out because it just wasn't for me. And quickly after that, I got involved with doing more drugs. And the group of people I grew up in, like, drugs were pretty acceptable. There was a common joke of, if you drug tested the soccer team, we wouldn't have a soccer team anymore.
Okay.
And so drugs in society where I was going were like pretty acceptable. Like a lot of people were doing them. It wasn't like it's not smart to do that, don't do that type of thing. And so I got involved with street drugs after a while. And so I got involved with the street drugs, even going through school. And quickly after that, I got into the state of being homeless. And it was by choice, but it was like, why would you choose that? You know, I mean, I was
Mhm.
sleeping in abandoned buildings. I was sleeping outside during the winter time, like not in Montana, but more in Colorado. And it was just like, it made me very resourceful in a sense, which was the good part about it. You know, when I had to sleep outside, I had to really think for myself and say, okay, I'm cold. I need to figure out something to keep me warm with. I don't have any money. So what do I do? Oh, well, you know, I'm aware of this place in such and such location and they give out blankets. So I have to be very on my feet for the first time, you know, because mostly throughout my life, it's like, oh, food is here, bed is here, no thought process, very easy.
Right.
So it was a cool experience to go through just for that alone. And after so many months of that, I was like, okay, I'm just kind of tired of it. And then I went back to Montana and got a job, ended up going to a couple trade schools, lived in Colorado again for several years, finally moved down to Florida. And it was those transition points of being in the state of being homeless to making a small better choice, which was like moving back to Colorado. So I went from being homeless to like living in a tent in the backyard of my friend. I had a stable spot to sleep again. It's not a big change though. Like we look back on it now and it's like, why does it matter? But the thing is it was a small enough improvement to say it's
Right.
an improvement. And so we stretch that out over a 10-year time frame. I'm getting education. I'm getting involved with better groups. I'm seeking better forms of therapy. I'm being around good people. And all this is just kind of continuing on and continuing on until I finally move to Florida. And then it's like, I buy a house, I buy a car. Like my
Oh,
life just
nice.
really smooths out in comparison to anything else that I've experienced before.
So from Colorado, from Montana to more cold in Colorado to nice sunny Florida.
Yeah, yeah. I'm never leaving this state.
Yes. You know what? I don't love Florida, but there are parts of Florida I would live in, but
Mhm.
I'm not a cold person either.
Yeah.
Like I've been to Colorado
Uh-huh.
and I don't see the fun in sliding down a hill in snow. Like I just don't
I
get
mean,
it.
it is fun. It is enjoyable. I think it's the part of like, and Colorado is extremely mild in comparison to Montana, but the wintertime in Montana just gets so brutally cold that you can't go outside without it hurting to breathe. Like your
Oh
skin
my
hurts
God.
yeah, it gets so intensely cold. And
I'm
other
in New
people
York.
that,
I'm in New York.
huh?
I mean, it gets cold in New York, but not like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't want to live in cold states anymore.
I do want to take my husband. He likes to fish,
Mhm.
and someone told him that Montana was nice for fly fishing or so I told him, yeah, one day, that's the operative word. One day we'll get to Montana. But I really would like to get to a lot of states that I haven't gone to. Merely
Mhm.
because I haven't had a reason to go. So if I had a conference there, oh, I would be in Montana.
Ah.
But without a real reason or knowing anyone, let's say, then I
Mhm.
wouldn't do that. So where were your parents in all of this during the time you were homeless, and did they try to get you back home?
Oh yeah, they were for sure concerned about me. You know, I remember there was a point in time where other people said you look hungry. Like I was thinning for sure. I was losing muscle mass and weight and I just wasn't mentally there, you know, and I was just doing more drugs and I had like it's very fortunate that I decided to go live back in Montana because if I would have just continued on the path that I was on, it would have just been worse, 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 worse.
Well, what inspired you to stop?
Stop
How
doing
did you,
drugs.
yeah, how did you come to that decision to stop doing drugs?
It took a while. I mean, I would say the main drawing line was when I was in Job Corps. If anyone's not familiar, it's a
Yeah.
training program and you can learn a trade skill there. And they have a policy where they say you can't do drugs there. So I was like, okay, no worries.
Just
you know?
like that, you just said, "Oh, okay."
Well, I mean, I was kind of calming down from my streak of doing drugs after I left Colorado as well. Because I wasn't around in a group that was doing as much, like I didn't have access, let's just say,
Right,
to
right.
as many drugs. And so I naturally stopped hanging out with people who are doing drugs, and I don't have access to doing drugs. So I'm already kind of like coming to kind of a pit stop, you could say, with drugs. And then I go into Job Corps, and then it's like, can't do drugs or you'll get kicked out. And I'm like, for sure not blowing this education
And that was
opportunity.
important to you. Job Corps was important to you. You obviously liked it enough to stop.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I formed a group of friends in Job Corps, and the education was, at that point, education to me was very important because I was like, I understand the reason why I'm getting educated. I know that I'm using this to go get a job, and it's
Yes.
something that I had interest in. And that's when my focus became like, I want to be an A plus student, even if it's like maybe not always getting along with the instructor, but like showing up on time, doing the work,
Yeah.
passing the tests and stuff like that became very important to me because I knew that after I left Job Corps as well, that I would have an employable skill, and that made a big difference for me in terms of training and mindset in relation to high school, where I was just like, I don't care because it doesn't really, it doesn't help me
Right,
with anything.
right. How did you come to buy your home?
It was through a variety of things. There was fortunately stable I had stable jobs that I was working with, and I was putting away money for retirement, and I was getting my credit score back up because there was a time where I was, I think, like 15 or 20 grand in debt very easily. And so I had to get out of debt. I was getting into good credit scores. And this was like over a series of years.
Yeah.
And fortunately, with the job that I had and the income that I had set aside for the retirement account, it was, in my opinion, just enough for a bank to be like, okay, we'll give you a loan.
So, what do you like about your life now? What are the things that make you happy with your current state of being?
That's a great question. I would say that I don't need another source of entertainment to make me happy. Like, I don't need drugs to make me happy. I don't need alcohol to make me happy. I'm not addicted to anything.
What makes
Uh,
you happy?
I would say I really enjoy reading now. My literacy levels have gone up quite a bit, and I like to do simple things like play the harmonica when I'm driving, and I listen to music, and I like to go running on the beach. And it's just that it's a lot of freedom not having to be tied down to a substance, to be honest with you. I mean, I was on drugs, and I was drinking, I'd say, like, for about 5 or 6 years, and it just wasn't like, after getting out of it, it was like, wow, even the first few years after being sober, it was still like, I just want it. I still want it. I still have that desire for it. But after
Mhm.
so many years of breaking off from it, it's a little bit like, oh, I can do what I want with my time, and I don't have
Yeah,
to have this strained attention on an
yeah.
alternative thing.
And what are the bad sides? What are some of the things that you talked about? Some of them, of being on drugs, but especially for your family, do they recognize how far you've come in your life, and how do they help you be happy about that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember there were times where I would receive letters from my own family members that specifically said that I was very selfish. And I was
Oh,
like, wow, okay, that's what the spirit like. And it was kind of like a little bit like of a like smack in the face type of thing. Like, it wasn't intended to be nice or anything, but to hear that from your own family member, it's a little bit like, I don't like them thinking of me like that, And it's not like the worst thing in the world, but it's also not the best thing in the world.
right.
And just recently, that same family member sent me a letter that said, you're a kind, intelligent, helpful, caring person. So it's like somebody else is recognizing it. It's not just
Yeah.
me being aware of it.
Yeah. Oh, that is so great.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine, coming from where you did and then someone saying stuff to you. Like, did they know that you were being self-medicating, that made you this way? Like, did they see you as unkind? And for them to say that you were selfish, I guess I understand that in a little bit, in a sense that, you were really thinking about yourself. But I wouldn't say that to someone if I knew they were on drugs or trying to get their life together.
Right, right. Yeah, that's fair.
So how are you sharing? You've acquired a lot of knowledge. How are
Yeah.
you sharing that now? How are you telling other people about it and letting them know what you've gone through and where you've come from and where you are now?
Yeah, I would say that at a very young age, the whole idea of the word habit really played a big part in my life because when I was getting off of the Ritalin, for example, I knew that the Ritalin wasn't solving anything, and that I knew that if I just had better eating habits, that would solve the problem for my ability to be attentive in school. So I went to changing to having better eating habits. I was also stretching and being physically active throughout all of my life as well. So I have a very disciplined, like every day I stretch, no matter what. Like there's a very, I would say like 3 days out of the year, I might not stretch. And that's just because of situational things that come up where I'm sleeping not at my house. But even then it's very ingrained into me that I'm very likely to do some form of stretching. And so getting off of drugs as well went from, that was really where I'd say my habits had to play a big part. And it was from everything from finding a different group of people to be around to waiting it out, because there is this lagging time frame of delayed gratification that someone has to go through in order to really see that the changes they are making really are impacting their lives. And when you're only seeing it from a day-to-day experience, it's just a grinding measure of effort. But when you look at 5, 10, 15 years later, there's this huge, massive change. And that's really where I have been at, is I've been making these small, decisive, better choices on a regular basis for over a decade now. And initially, like choosing to leave Colorado from being homeless to living in a tent makes no absolute difference. Anyone who sees that, anyone who observes that, it's like, are you trying? Like, what's the big deal? Like, you're just doing this one thing. But the main point is that it was these continued progressive changes. And that's what really elaborates someone to, or helps them continue to be on this good path of direction. And you can kind of see it like if you were to look at it on a graph, if you just stay the same for the next 10 years, you kind of flatline in a sense. Like there's not a big change. Right. But if you try to make just little choices that are better, instead of eating the candy bar, eat a protein bar. Instead of going out and watching a movie, maybe staying home and reading a book or spending time with a loved one. And when you can make those little teeny tiny changes that seem to make no difference in the long run, no difference in the short term at all.
Right.
In the long run, you can see over the time frame that you have really come to an accomplished state in your own life.
Wow. That's really powerful, because you have to think about it, first of all, like where you are now and the incremental changes that are happening. Mm-hmm. So what would you say is your best habit besides stretching? You stretch every day. You're better than I am.
Consistency would honestly be the habit that I would say has been the one thing that has won me more accomplishment than anything else. It's just my ability to show up on a day by day basis. And I've been through moments where I was ready to literally walk off of jobs and being so frustrated with the employer who just screamed at me for the who knows how many time, and just ready to hurt him physically. You know what I mean? Like just having that mental state where it's like I'm mad and I better leave before I do something. And it's just this sense of like, okay, let's calm down and continue. You know, there was a great movie, which I think it's called Unbreakable, where it's about this Olympian athlete who was a track gold medalist track star, signed up to be in the military, and you see him go through these, I forget what they're called. They're not like hate camps, but they're these camps that they basically, he was in Korea or something like that, and they basically just treated him so terribly. And the whole movie is about how he basically got through the war, stayed alive, and his mindset was they can't beat me. You know, if I can just stay alive, then I'll win.
Right.
You know, and it's stuff like that where it's like I'm not experiencing the same type of thing, but it's just that perseverance to just say, okay, I just need to take one more step forward. And when you embrace that mindset and push that muscle, sometimes it doesn't work at first because it hasn't been spent having effort put into it. But if you keep trying and putting that effort into it of, okay, one more step forward, one more day, just one more day, then you can get to that state where you're progressively continuing to do something. I mean, this theory that I'm talking about has really captured my whole life, because I've been skating. I've been on skateboard, snowboarding for 20 plus years. I've been podcasting for like 3 years at this point. And just now, after producing podcasting for like 3+ years, I finally figured out how to grow my audience. And that's what I was trying to do the entire time. And I'm frustrated it took so long, but I'm glad that I got to the point where I said, okay, good, I figured that out.
You learned a lot. You've learned a lot since doing that. You probably can help me with growing my audience.
My pleasure.
That's for sure. So what do you wish for the next generation? I mean, well, first, let me back up. Tell me a little bit about your book, what your book is going to be about, and what your podcast is about. And then how will this impact the next generation?
Yeah, both are on habits. My podcast talks about other people's habits, and it's cool because the questions that I get into with people naturally gravitate towards what they're doing on a day-to-day basis that helps them with their action steps. And the book itself breaks down what habit is, because a lot of people just say, oh, a habit is something I do on a regular basis. And that's true, but it breaks down even further into that. And when you can see that it's breaking down into these smaller pieces, you can start to alter and change your behaviors when you become aware of them. And that's when you can start making a real change for yourself and impacting and moving your own life in the right direction. You know,
you're talking about it. My habit is making lists.
That's great.
I make lists for everything. And the other habit I have is my calendar. I live by my calendar. Everything goes on if it's not on my calendar, it's not happening. And maybe that's bad. I just really segment my time and try to account for as much of my time as possible. And that helps me to see how long does it take me to do something? Or did it take me longer to do it than I thought? And was it something that distracted me from doing it? You know, like, is that a real amount of time, right? That it took me to do it? Or if I had 1 hour and all of a sudden an emergency came up, that task took 3 hours because something intervened. Like, I take a good look at that all the time, because that's how I keep myself on track. And it's some people think it's a bad habit to just not be spontaneous and not, you live off your calendar too much. What do you mean I have to be on your my husband says that to me. Am I on your calendar today?
That's funny. It is interesting that you pointed out, because that is a common myth related to building too good of a habit, is your life becomes too structured. But the exact opposite is actually true, because when you have so much structure to your life, then you can start saying, oh, I'm using the structure to use it for this amount of freedom, or I'm going to do this with this freedom. When you can clamp down on your finances well enough, that's when you actually have financial freedom.
That's a good habit. That is a good habit, to really look at your finances. Mm-hmm. This is something I talk to business owners about all the time, because they don't know their books. They don't know how much money they're making and where that money is going in the business. You could be making $1 million a year and be broke.
Mm-hmm. Yep, totally.
And a lot of people don't understand that. They just see the top line, but they don't look at the bottom line.
Right. And that's true, because
I like to look at the bottom line. I'm a bottom line person.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, because I've heard people say that they've made $50,000 a year in their business, but they have $30,000 of expenses. So it's like, are you really making a lot of money, or are you just saying that, yeah, my overall income produced exactly what you're saying was that much, And
I come from a family of savers. My family is big on saving, very blue collar family, but I can tell you, they all have their own homes. Mm-hmm. They all send their kids to school. Like, they have more, or do more with what they have than people who make more money than they do.
Right. That's beautiful.
And then I've always heard, like, how come you guys, your mom, like, what are you guys doing while you can buy a house? Like, I'm like, we're not drug dealers. We're not all but they are master savers. Mm-hmm. Money goes in the bank. My family is Jamaican.
Oh, cool.
They throw this thing called a susu. Mm-hmm. It's a saving where one person holds the money like a bank. That person's the bank. And everyone puts in, like, whether it's $100 a week or $100 a month, a specific amount of money. And then let's say maybe 20 people are in this. At the end of 20, each person get the pool of money each week.
Oh, wow.
Right. And that pays a tuition, or that pool of money pays for vacation or Christmas. You get it at Christmas, and it's your Christmas club, right? But it's not drawing interest. That's the part I don't like. But you definitely save. And I know people who've been doing this for as long as I've known them, for years and years. They always have that. And so they know they have money coming in, and they plan around that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's a habit that is really productive, and I like, around money.
I completely agree with that. Yeah.
So did anyone inspire you to get into, start forming your habits? Like, how did you get into that? Are you looking at your habits and understanding how you utilize it?
Mm-hmm. It all started when I was in a gymnastics class as a kid, and we were stretching, and I thought I was being pretty cool that day. And it was a particular stretch where the instructor was there, and I was just like, yeah, just keep going. Like, we were doing, I'll just be honest, we were doing the splits, right? And I was probably about a foot off of the ground, where I was like, yeah, this is probably as far as I can go. Okay. And I just told, and the instructor was there, and he, like, to help us get more flexible, he would like literally push us down further to the ground. And I thought I was being cool that day, and I was like, just keep going, until I was almost into a full splits. by the end of it. And for the next 2 weeks, I had a hard time walking, let's say,
Yeah,
because it
that's
was
what I was
very,
gonna say.
yeah, yeah. It was painful. It was very painful to learn how to do that. And that pain was enough for me to say, I'm never going to re-experience that. I'm going to stretch every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
I understand. I was into cheerleading and boostering and all of that stuff, so I understand the pain of a split
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And so that formed your habit of just doing it
Mhm.
little at a time every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Just making sure that I stretched was one of the first things, and still is one of the first things on my to-do list every day.
How long do you stretch? How long do you stretch for?
Oh, I mean, sometimes I'll stretch for less than a minute, but I have like, let's say 6 things that I stretch out every single day, no fail. Yeah. I mean, there was like today, for example, where I literally had to just get up and leave to work because of like daylight savings and having to and like arranging that type of thing. So there's sometimes, like I said, where like I'll skip 1 or 2 days out of the year just because of certain situational things like that.
Yeah, my grandmother stretched every morning of her life.
Wow.
Like I was born seeing her stretch. As soon as she gets up in the morning, she sits on the side of her bed
Uh-huh.
and she does all her stretches, and then she touches her toes. It's like 10 minutes, but she
Yeah.
does this, she did it every single day. That's her way of getting out of bed, was to
Nice.
stretch her way out of bed. I did not get that habit.
I totally
I
understand.
jump out of bed,
Yeah.
my eyes open and I'm like, oh. So yeah, that's great to do. So
Uh-huh.
my other question was, have you inspired anyone, do you feel, that who's watched you go through this whole process of your life and say, hey, if Ian can do it, I can do it. I see Ian as a role model for me.
Mm. There's one particular person that I help with coaching them on their own habits. And from what I've seen, they went from not being able to consistently work out their entire life. They were dealing with these mental setbacks and physical body setbacks that basically in their mind set them up with the idea of not being able to work out. And after I helped them for about 2 or 3 weeks, they were able to consistently work out on a regular basis. And it's something that kind of fluctuates just like life, but she could say that, I'm able to do that now. I can perform that function. And it's great to see someone who has a change like that, because again, it's going back to, okay, you're working out for 10 minutes a day or 5 minutes a day in comparison to not working out at all. That's not a big change. Who cares? But when you look at 10-year time frame, that's when you see a massive difference.
Yeah, I know. I try to get in even just to get up. I have my little weight set back there. And so sometimes when I'm on Zoom, I'll turn my camera off if I'm not speaking or doing, and I'm actually sitting there with my weights, like
Nice.
just moving, because I'm sitting all day. I'm doing this all day, and you just got to get up and do something.
It's true. I can completely agree with that.
So now that you've done all of this and you've pretty much changed your life.
Yeah, 100%.
Are you afraid to try new things, or you just look at doing something new as, hey, I haven't done that yet, let me go try it? Because I know some people are just afraid of trying new, whether it's developing a new habit or a new eating pattern, or they just don't know how to do that and are literally afraid of developing new things.
No, not really. I mean, when it comes to putting my mindset on something, it is, I would say, fairly easy. It's getting to the point of making that decision to really stick with it. But after I get to that decision point, I figure out how to slowly get myself to do something. I'm not like a quit cold turkey type of person. And this is a lot of going back into the habit building ideas of saying, okay, how can I do this, even if it's for less than 2 minutes or less than 3 minutes or less than 4 minutes? How can I do it every single day, but still get it in? And I just had a success on this just today, where I've been working on getting myself to fast more. And initially I could only fast in the morning for like 3 hours, and then I needed to eat something. And that went on for weeks, weeks and weeks of just like, okay, just don't fast at this time of the day. And then it got to the point where I was like not fasting as much at night. And this was initially breaking down and going better and better and better until today, where I got to the point where it was kind of like leading up to it as well, because I was pushing my eating times later on throughout the day. And so yesterday, the last meal I ate was around 8 p.m. And then today was the first day where I fasted until 6:30 p.m. today.
All day?
So, yeah, I just didn't eat. I didn't eat. I basically just drank water and took a protein supplement that has no calories in it.
Right.
So I was able to do those two things together. And today was like the first day I did like a full day fast.
What's the reason for your fasting?
It's just proven to be healthy for people. I've talked with a couple people that are very educated on the subject, and there's a lot of benefits for it. The main reason why is because when you fast, what's really happening is your cells are basically being stored and saved. And when you're eating regularly, they have no room to breathe because they're just being functioned and everything's fine for them. But when you fast, what's happening is some of those cells are being eaten away at. And sometimes those cells are like cancer cells. And so you're actually getting rid of bad cells in your body. And we have trillions of cells in our system. So it's very like a big number to think with. But if you fast on a regular basis, you're starting to get rid of these potentially bad cells that are in your body and making it so that way you can push them to being better cells in a way, or just getting rid of the bad cells entirely. That's just my general concept on it. Yeah.
No, that's very interesting. I'm taking a look at myself, and I've gone to nutritionists, and I wouldn't call it fasting. I was so busy that I don't eat for
sure.
I don't call it fasting. And actually, after years of studying this with a nutritionist, I gain weight when I don't eat. Because my body thinks it's starving. And so when I do eat, it holds on to every little thing. And so for years, I kept saying, I didn't eat anything all day. Why am I gaining weight?
Right.
And I've gone to Biggest Loser camp. I've gone
totally. I know exactly what that is.
All of this stuff. And until I sat with a nutritionist, and they're like, I had to write out everything I ate, what time I ate it, and the whole plan. And she's like, well, you're not eating.
That's the problem.
You might call it fasting, but she's like, you're not eating. You need to eat more at regular intervals because everybody has a different body type, right? And mine, just when I don't eat, they're like, oh my God, I got some food and I'm just holding on to it for dear life.
That's what happens if you fast and then you eat some type of food. You have to be careful about what you eat when you're breaking a fast. Yeah, because your body will latch onto it. And it's like, I need to store that because you're starving me now. It
was a weird concept. I'm like, that makes no sense to me. But after a while, I'm like, yeah, that's, really true. And once I'm not a breakfast person, but once I start eating breakfast and then eating something small for lunch and a little bit more, dinner is probably my biggest meal. but I swear I started to lose weight.
Ah,
Like I feel so much better because
oh,
I
good.
just need that fuel,
Hmm.
to go. So I haven't tried officially fasting,
Okay, that's
even
fine.
though it's Lent. I've given something up, which is not the same as fasting, but that's as far as I've gotten. I probably won't go back to that again.
That's
But this
okay.
has been great.
Yeah, I agree.
So much. Anything
Yeah.
else you'd like your listeners to know?
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested on working on their habits and improving themselves, if they just want to find me on social media or my podcast over at iantolson.com or all the social platforms minus probably Twitter, I'd say
Okay.
that would be a good way to go if they're
And
interested
what
in doing
about your podcasting? What kind of guests do you have on your podcast if someone wants to be a guest?
Oh, I mean, I've had everything from a doctor to a Holocaust survivor to someone who goes through horrible physical injuries. I had one guy who weighed over 400 pounds, lost 200 pounds. So for
Wow.
me, I'm pretty wide open and open ended because habit is such a large topic
Yes.
that if someone has a good story, then it's worth investing into them and hearing what they have to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I thank you, Ian, for coming on. I'll be happy to return the favor at any time if I have any habits that you think will make sense to participate in your podcast as well.
That sounds great. Yeah, looking forward to it.
All righty. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Sandi. Thank you so much for sharing your journey on the first, where no two stories are alike, even if the circumstances are similar. Let this discussion serve as inspiration for others to show what's possible, and more importantly, to produce seconds and thirds.